because the only person who can perfectly meet your needs is you, because you're the only person who knows them in their fullness.
You're listening to Good is in the Details. I'm Gwendolyn Dolske.
And I'm Rudy Salo.
And this is the podcast where we learn what we didn't know in the spirit of Socrates, all with the aim of a more knowledgeable life, a happy life. We believe intellectual growth is part of the pillar to happiness. And today we have cognitive psychologist, author of the forthcoming book that's coming out this year, Self-Care Potato Chips, How to Choose Nourishing Self-Care in an Empty Calorie Culture, Dr. Amber Wardell. And I love this episode because it reminds me of a conversation we had with Angela Gorel, author of The Gravity of Joy. And something that these works have in common is that you have these people in this environment of all of the academic literature at their fingertips, PhDs, and yet life hands them a curveball, and they sit down and they reflect on that existential experience. And we get that with Amber, where she is just very honest and open about issues that she had in her own marriage, in her own personal development, where she had to pause, step away, and reflect on what mattered to her to make her whole. And then that is really the crux of this work.
Yeah, it seems like everybody's going through an existential crisis these days. Is the existential crisis just another... Is it just another term for midlife crisis? And I ask that because we've brought this up on an episode before, once with my good friend Rich Balling, about how we Gen Xers are going through our midlife crises a little bit different. You know, you started a podcast. I certainly started to have my crisis early and started becoming more creative in writing. And I don't know, is that just another term?
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you have your existential crisis, you got to think about self-care, and self-care means things that make you happy. I don't know. What are your thoughts? And do you think we adequately address that in this episode?
I think so. One of the things I really enjoyed with this discussion of Amber is that I've been kind of questioning this idea of, well, how do we understand what our self is in order for us to address self-care? And then in order for us to show up in relationships. So it's like, at first we have to understand, wait a minute, what is the difference between myself and then the self that I think I'm supposed to be for others? And I think the existential crisis comes when you only live for others. And then all of a sudden it dawns on you like, wait a minute, what about me? You know, we're afraid to ask questions or to nurture ourselves because it sounds egotistical or whatnot. But the reality is, the better we understand ourselves, then we can take care of ourselves, and then we can be in loving, healthy relationships. And that's what Amber brings to this conversation.
Yes, that's correct. I remember being stumped when we started talking about the self and the which self, and I'm just not smart enough for that. So other smart people.
Well, we did kind of a feminist bent on it, to be fair.
Definitely a feminist bent. Definitely a feminist. I tried. Basically, I tried and failed, like I always do.
No!
But nevertheless, it's still a helpful episode.
Okay, let's talk about self-care with Dr. Amber Wardell. There's something I think that I really want to tap into is that your work on self-care, self-actualization. This is a big question in philosophy. So I want to know from a psychologist's point of view, let's start with, what is a self?
So a self, and let me just sort of give a small clarification here. As a psychologist, I'm a cognitive psychologist. So I don't do therapy. I'm not a therapist. I don't do clinical psychology in any way. So my background, though, is in research related to these processes that underpin what people do in therapy.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to make sure that I say that up front, that I'm not speaking as a therapist, but rather as a research psychologist. There may be people who are actual therapists who may define things a little differently than I do, and just that might be an important caveat. But the self, I tend to look at self from generally the idea of, like, have you heard of family systems?
Mm-mm.
Okay, so there is internalized family systems approach, which says that the self is essentially components of all types of parts. And all of those parts are equal and none of those parts are bad. And all of those parts have different purposes and different roles and different things that they're aiming to achieve within you, the self, which is the highest conscious. The self is somebody who is, you're trying always to unify all of these parts together. And so a lot of times, like when people are going to parts work therapy or they're doing parts work at home, they're working on unifying all of these disparate parts and learning how to get all of those unified into the higher order self. And the self is somebody who is, they call it like the 8 C's of self. It's you're curious, you are conscientious. They're not all 8 of them are going to come to mind right now. But essentially, that self is the person who is overseeing all of these parts with the different desires, goals, and motives.
Because I was thinking before we can even talk about the self-actualization in a relationship, in a romantic relationship, we have to first be clear of what the self is, what we're talking about. So it's all these parts and these dynamics. See, in philosophy, it's an interesting conundrum because it's like you look at a photo of yourself as a baby and we say that's me, but in no way is it the me that's like at 46 years old, like on a physical level, mental level. So it's like, what is the continuum of the self? And if you say, well, it's memory, but then if one day, let's say I were in an accident and I wake up the next day and I have zero memory, I'm different, but memory couldn't be the defining trait of what makes me me because I would still be me without the memory. So see, this is the kind of philosophical stuff that drives Rudy crazy. Rudy's like, what's wrong with you guys? He's a lawyer, so he's just like, I need black and white stuff.
No, I'm sufficiently lost. Yeah, it's like, oh my God, I can't believe who has the time to ask these questions.
Well, in Buddhism, there is no self, but it actually
sounds,
I know, well, it's kind of like what Amber's saying though, because the Buddhist point of view is that all the things that are not you actually make you. So it's like the fact that I'm, let's say, a teacher requires that I have the student, so it's not me, or that I am a mom, which is my daughter, but is not me. It's like all these different components that make you you.
Yeah, look, I clearly have a lot of problems. Okay. I am not somebody that anybody should emulate in any way, shape, or form. So my saying that this is ridiculous to ask these questions or these things, maybe that's the root of my problem. Maybe I should be doing this. But my initial gut reaction is I don't have time for this. But that's just me.
Amber said she's not a therapist. You're not getting free therapy out of this one.
I'm trying to get some therapy, but she's not biting. She hasn't even said a thing, not a thing. But okay, all right, we can move on.
So then when it comes to self-actualization, I'm just wondering what you think, because you're on TikTok. That's actually how I discovered you. And there is this trend with the trad wife. And all I see with it is that there is a loss of self in it. So and I just want to know what your thoughts are, that the self is, you cannot develop the self if you are living according to cultural rules that you did not create. And that there would be a loss of self in investing all of this time into that, into, let's say, the appearance or your attitude. And so if you get, so that's to me what represents the trad wife, is a loss of self. I'm just wondering what you think of that.
It's difficult for me because I feel like you have to parse out, and I feel like this gets lost in a lot of the conversation online, which is that there are homemakers and then there are trad wives. And it's really hard to know because social media incentivizes all of us to do things that will be engaging and get us to make money and all these other things. Like, I do believe there's a cohort of women that we're calling the trad wives on TikTok and Instagram who are emulating sort of they're playing up to the male dream idea of femininity and what a woman's role is. And the question in my mind is whether those women actually believe this stuff that they're talking about, or whether they are just portraying something that they know that men are attracted to and like, and that women hate, and it will get them lots of engagement. And the reason why I want to make that distinction up front is I never want to sound like I am conflating trad wives with like just women who love to be stay-at-home moms and homemakers, and that is their identity. That is their self. Is like, I look at me and my identity and what fulfills me and makes me happy. My highest self-actualized self is being a mom at my home and providing for my husband. And I do think that is qualitatively different than the trad wife idea, which I think is what you're talking about, which is like these women who just are either playing a part in order to make money, or if they sincerely believe it, I think you're right, that they've lost that sense of self and they're finding identity in how they are defined by men.
How do we find out what our self is? So even tapping into self-actualization, how do we come to the conclusion of what it is that makes us us before we can even communicate that to somebody else? Because in your work, I was thinking about, I had this conversation with my partner not too long ago, and then I read your stuff and I'm like, oh my God, she just put it perfectly, what I was trying to communicate. And what I had said is, I need to be able to show up for myself so that then I can show up for you and for our daughter and for my work. But first I have to show up for myself. And
Yeah.
so I was talking about like needing the space to do that. How do we find out what it is that makes us us, that we can tap into, that's, not different from a superficial level, but really, how is it that I'm saying show up for ourselves, but self-actualize?
I can only speak for myself on this one, having gone to a lot of therapy. And that is for me, and what the principle of parts work and internal family systems therapy, what it does. So we all know the concept of parts when we say, like, well, a part of me wants to get out of this relationship and a part of me wants to stay. And those are two parts of the self. In order to self actualize, in order to reach that point where you can have trust in your inner knowing and be able to know it for yourself and communicate to other people what it is that you want, you have to be able to confront both of those parts and understand what those two parts need, why they have differences of opinions about what you should be doing here, and then trying to get harmony between those two, or figure out which one of those two is closest in matching to like what kind of the broader system of your parts also need. So for me personally, right, finding out myself in my marriage meant going to therapy, and we identified about four main parts of mine. One of them we call the compassionate femme. And she's this part within me who is conservative leaning, even though I'm incredibly progressive. And she likes traditional gender roles and she likes taking care of her man and taking care of her children. But all of my other main parts are progressive, feminists. A lot of them are kind of angry, and they are constantly kind of pushing down this other part. So for me, getting at myself and what myself needs is one, understanding that I have a part that is foundationally different than all my other parts, but that she matters too, and her wants and desires matter as well. And then figuring out, how do I make sure that these other parts aren't crowding her out and insisting that her needs never get met because they're out of line with what sort of myself is like and what these other parts are like, and finding unity among those. So when my husband and I reconciled our marriage, some work that I had to do was understanding, okay, I am all about equitable division of labor. I'm all about fairness in our relationship. I'm all about equality of our roles here and non-traditional gender roles in any way. But there is this part of me who needs to be nurtured, who wants a man who is strong and lets me be tender. And learning how to communicate all of that to my husband really meant tracking down all of these different parts and understanding them so that I could then understand myself.
I appreciate that so much. The reason why is because I've kind of joked around about, as Gen X, that, and Rudy's Gen X too, but that I grew up with parents who are of the silent generation. So I've got that kind of information coming at me. And then at the same time, growing up, being in love with like Wonder Woman and Charlie's Angels from the 70s, where there was this message of women can do other things, but you got to be really skinny while you're doing it. But women all of a sudden have this empowerment. And you've got the influx of Title IX and how that's changed things, the concept of a female athlete, women having bank accounts. So I feel like I'm kind of caught between these two things where I can read all the feminist literature that I want and I can be a feminist, but at the same time, like with the man, I'm like, you're taking out the trash and you're carrying the luggage. I'm sorry. That's just how it's going. And I appreciate so much that you're saying like that these things aren't mutually exclusive, but we're allowed to be complex and be honest about what our needs are. Because I'm wondering if there's other women out there who feel conflicted about like, hey, I'm supposed to be this way, but I really would like to have X in a different way.
There's actually a lot of research that points to that. And that was why when I pitched my column to Psychology Today, I said I want to call it compassionate feminism. And they came back and they were like, okay, explain yourself. And I was telling them, I was like, I think when people hear compassionate feminism, they automatically assume that means compassionate towards men. And I do get a lot of pushback from women because I talk about like patriarchy, as we all know, patriarchy harms men too. We have to help men get out from under patriarchy, just like we have to liberate ourselves. But the premise of compassionate feminism is actually understanding that women, all humans, but when we're talking about feminism, women are very, very complex. We have a lot of indoctrination that has been put into us. And sometimes it's hard to know which of these things have been culturally indoctrinated and which things are actually mine, right? There is research showing that there are many, many feminists who are like, actually, the research says that there are many women who identify with all of the feminist ideals, but will not call themselves feminists because they believe that, well, I still kind of like the idea of the masculine man.
Mm-hmm.
And I still like to be taken care of. And I have these sort of stereotypical traditional ideas of what relationships should be like. So maybe I don't really qualify as a feminist. And then you have women who identify as feminists who feel ashamed to talk about the fact that they serve their husbands first at dinner time, who feel like they're not allowed to say, well, my husband is the breadwinner for our household and he deposits money into my bank account that I use for this and that, because they're afraid that feminists are going to say that that is wrong and that that's not very feminist of you. And so the concept of compassionate feminism is kind of getting at this thing that you're talking about here, which is that any woman has feminist leanings, and probably any woman also has within her some traditional leanings. And a lot of us are just trying to figure out what part of these traditional values that I hold are me, and which ones have been just handed down to me that I need to divest of.
This episode is sponsored by Factor. What could Factor actually be? Well, let me tell you, Factor is a great way to eat healthy and take charge of your health and what you put into your body. Basically, eating better is easy with Factor's delicious, ready-to-eat meals. Every fresh, never frozen meal, so don't put these into the freezer. These are chef crafted, dietitian approved, and ready to go in just 2 minutes. You'll have over 35 different options to choose from every week, including Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, and Keto. I did the Keto. I could go on and on about all the delicious meals that I had. All 6 of the ones that I ate were filling and left me energized and ready to work out and go throughout my day. Also, there are more than 60 add-ons that help you stay fueled up and feeling good all day long. Honestly, what are you waiting for? Get started today and get after your goals. There are 2-minute meals, fuel up fast with Factor's restaurant quality meals that are ready to heat and eat wherever you are. Pancakes, smoothies, and more. Discover a wide variety of easy options for the entire day, like breakfast, midday bites, and more. No prep, no mess meals. Factor meals are ready to heat and eat. There's no prepping, cooking, or cleanup needed. Flexible. Today is all about flexibility. We're working from home, we're working from here, we're working from there. It fits to your schedule. Get as much or as little as you need by choosing your meals every single week. Plus, you can pause or reschedule your deliveries at any time. Factor is the perfect solution if you're looking for fast, premium options with no cooking required. Thank God, because I am such a bad cook, I could burn cereal. That's right, I could burn cereal, but not Factor. Factor is the perfect solution for fast, premium options with no cooking required. Sign up and save. We've done the math. Factor is less expensive than takeout, and every meal is dietitian approved to be nutritious and delicious. Head to factormeals.com/details50. That's factormeals.com/details50 and use code details50 to get 50% off. That's code details50 at factormeals.com/details50 to get 50% off.
I want to ask about the self-care idea, because I had a debate with somebody about this. Feel free to tell me I'm wrong, but be gentle. And then I think that women in particular confuse self-care with pampering. And I made the claim that, believe me, I like to get my hair done. I love to get my nails done, but I don't call that self-care. And my explanation for that is because it's a financial exchange for a presentation. And that is not really what makes me me. That's just me participating in a system that I didn't create. And I enjoy it, but I don't consider that self-care. So I absolutely love mystery thriller genre books. My self-care is when I indulge in that and it's just like quiet, or I go out for a walk, because that's what makes me me and allows me to think and function and have clarity. I put that under self-care. What taps into what you're describing as self-actualization. Do you think, so am I wrong here? Is getting your nails done, does that count as self-care? Is there a difference between pampering and self-care?
So I try to drive a hard line, like on my social medias and to some extent in my book, making it really clear that, like, for women, we have to stop defining self-care as bubble baths and solo trips to the grocery store and Target runs and all of that stuff. Self-care is deeper. Self-care is more meaningful. Self-care is getting at the things that actually fulfill you. Just like you said, getting your nails done may not, but I think and my thinking about this is evolving as I speak with other women about this, because I will sometimes make I'll make a statement that I know is going to be controversial, but I'll say showers are not self-care. Stop insisting that moms in particular treat showers as self-care. And those posts always get a lot of praise and likes, but there's always some women who say, I get what you're saying, but to me, showers are self-care. And so even my idea on that has had to evolve, that like self-care is whatever you are doing that brings you peace, that makes you feel good about yourself, that makes you feel like you are taking care of that part of you that no one else is taking care of. And in my book, Beyond Self-Care Potato Chips, that's why there's that word beyond at the beginning, is making that distinction that like the self-care potato chips, the bubble bath, the nails, the whatever you're into, tarot card readings, those are great. Do those things. Just make sure that your self-care regimen also includes the deeper things, like communicating your needs, setting your boundaries, knowing what your core needs are, and differentiating those from your sort of secondary and tertiary needs, and learning how to negotiate that. Like, I will make sure that my core needs are met, and I can compromise on the secondary and tertiary ones. Like, so my answer would be, you're right, but also not completely. It's all self-care if it makes you feel fulfilled. But I just feel like so much of this consumeristic self-care culture out there and the messaging that it gives women is that the nails and the bubble bath and the Target runs are enough. And it's always tied to consumerism, if you notice. Like, there's no one out there who's like, ladies, make sure you're setting your boundaries, and like putting millions of dollars into an ad campaign for that, right?
Yeah, because there's always been this history of the way in which a woman appears or invests in herself is also part of her moral worth. And that's what I think has always kind of bothered me. And so, because if I were to show up for work, spending like 5 minutes that maybe a man uses to get ready to work, people would wonder, like, is she okay? Or wonder if I deserve to be standing there in the university setting if I don't spend that extra time to be presentable. Whereas my male colleagues don't, some choose to, some choose not to, some can show up in a t-shirt and jeans, but they are able to walk in with the authority no matter how they look. And so there's this link to, even in the advertisement, is that you're worth it, or like really treat yourself, or that you're like a good woman when you spend all of this time in the consumerism.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look at how we began this call. Both you and I obviously not expecting to be on video, and both having to make like apology. We didn't apologize, but both of us feeling
A
the
warning
need to address it. That like this is not what I usually look like. I'm sorry. And men don't do that to each other. It's crazy.
The worst part is that this is what I usually look like. Actually, this this is not what I usually look like for others. When the makeup is done, like, and I'm in like proper clothing, that is not the norm. That's like the sliver of my day. This is actually the norm. Well, what are some tips on communicating our needs for self-actualization with a romantic partner?
Let me just get my brain together on that one.
No, that's okay. Because I'm thinking also for Rudy, because I know Rudy, he's been doing a lot of, like, in the last few years of his life, trying to do these other, what would we calling Mount Whitney, Rudy? Like adding this other part to your life. And that would be a way. It's called hiking.
It's called hiking. It's where you put some shoes on and you walk like kind of a long distance, you hopefully with some water
uphill,
usually at an elevated angle.
So Rudy, so your wife is a general surgeon. You have 2 children. How do you communicate? Hey, Kate, I'm gonna go away for a weekend. I need to be in nature for a few hours.
It's a great question, and I could relate to what Amber was writing about in her chapter 2 on Maslow about communicating needs. At the end of the day, because I am such an unusual person, of course, our marriage is unusual in that Kate is on some kind of a call schedule where she technically could be called away to a hospital within 20 minutes, almost half of the month. That's at nights, that's on weekends, at least 1 to 2 weekends a month, so that she has to pretty much be on call. So that when she's on call, I am on call, right? And it's just kind of an added extra on top of everything else. It's an added extra layer of stress that like anything can change at a moment's notice. So, after several years of this and managing a couple children, it just kind of came down to, hey, look, I'm here. I'm here to support your career. Your career is very important. I know you get a lot of love from this. I know you feel like you're giving back to the community. And I am here to support you because you're a badass, and our community needs surgeons like you. But what I need is when you're not on call, I do need to go to a concert, or I might need a day possibly to go and do some training hikes where later on in the year, I might, if I'm lucky enough to secure a permit, I might go do Mount Whitney and I might be gone for a couple of days. That's my self-care because there's just massive amounts of stress for half the month, right? I'm on a curfew, got to be home, got to manage everything. And then that's on top of the job and a couple of other things. So we just communicated it, and it was like, okay. And also at the same time, I mean, she can't just be working. Like, I'm very protective. I try to get her own self-care, which for her, it is long showers, but really what it is it's massages and it's some girls trips. I wish she would take more girls trips. I'm trying to push her to do more girls trips so she can have more fun. But of course, when you're on call and away for a lot, what she finds fun is spending time with the children because she doesn't get to spend that much time with the children. So it's like, I don't want to push her away and say, no, you have to go spend time with your friends. No, your self-care is your self-care. You need to tell me what that is. And so I can help protect that and bring that about for you. It's all about communication.
I'm glad that we winnowed that down a little. I think that my first reaction was like, oh my God, there's so many things to talk about when it comes to communicating with your partner about self-care and your needs. But winnowing it down to this, like, how do we handle these kind of difficult situations, right? Like, I think in the book, I talk about a few things. One of them being, and it kind of sounds like that's what you just touched on, is let's know what each other's most primary needs are, right? What are the things that we each both need to have in order to feel fulfilled and happy and like our tank is full, even when everything else is a disaster? I think when a couple both knows that about each other, they're able to communicate to one another about those things that they need and trust that their partner already knows those things and is trying to anticipate those things for them. And so I think it's even the next chapter in my book is called Mind Reader. It's all about not expecting people to read your mind and the difficulty that my husband and I had navigating that, because for whatever reason, as girls, I think as girls especially, we get sort of indoctrinated into this idea, and I'm not even sure who's doing it, but we get this idea that like the perfect romantic partner will be able to anticipate all of your needs, will know you so well that they will always know the right thing to do at the right moment and swoop in and get it done when you need somebody. And so I know that I went into my marriage expecting that. I don't know why, but like I wouldn't communicate what my needs were. And then I would be disappointed and frustrated in my husband when he wouldn't show up for those needs that he didn't even know that I had. So yeah, for us, it was about like really step one, knowing our own core needs. Step two, learning each other's core needs. And then step three, understanding how to sort of negotiate the things that aren't pertaining to our core needs. And I think that learning just those kind of three steps helped a lot. And on my personal journey, learning not to expect him to know ahead of time has been huge for me.
In cognitive psychology, I'm curious, how do you go about researching this stuff? How does it even come up? And do you distinguish between generations, heterosexual couples, queer couples? Like, how does the research even happen to find out what the needs are for different groups? Or it could be like even maybe of a different religion. Like, what kind of factors into the communication? Or is there like a universal need, that we can all pinpoint to, that there's something that every person needs, and then they have to filter out all those other kind of cultural things like generation, ethnicity, religion, nationality?
I mean, I would say that where you're sort of going there is a little bit out of my wheelhouse. I don't do research pertaining to like self-actualization and needs and things like that. And maybe that's something that I should clarify about the book. The book is part memoir, part self-care. So it's like, or part self-help, I mean. So a lot of it is talking about my own personal story and then what I've been learning in therapy and what I've been learning just from reading other people's research in that regard. So I don't have my own personal research to speak about from that angle. My research is on motivation, cognition, emotion, and metacognition. So I just want to like state that up front. But even from the chapter that I sent you, there is the Maslow hierarchy of needs. And so we all know that we have, like, foundationally, every person has those first several set of needs that we have to have. We have to have food, we have to have shelter, we have to have security and whatnot. And then love is towards the top. We all have to have love. And I think we all can equally define what love for the most part is. But that top tier, the one that in my chapter, I speak about how a lot of the love stories that we see end with love, and they don't talk about the next piece, which is self-actualization. And self-actualization, I don't think can be defined for anyone. You're not going to find a cross section of self-actualization for people of different communities or different ethnicities or upbringings. That's going to come down to, I guess, the intersection of all of those things within one person. You have to keep in mind the fact that me being raised as a white woman, I'm going to have a very, very different set of needs to self-actualize than a Black woman or a Muslim woman, who grew up having very, very different experiences moving through a world, and especially if they live here in the United States. So those things are going to come to bear, of course. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's up to every person to understand themselves so deeply first. And this is why I'm such a huge advocate for going to therapy, because therapy is the place where you do that work of understanding how all of these things about the world that you've grown up in have impacted and shaped you and intersected together to form a very, very unique and specific list of needs that maybe only you have. And my guess would be that's why it's so hard for us to often communicate those needs to people, as they are so unique that it's almost impossible to get someone else to be able to relate to them. They can relate to a part of them, but not all.
Yeah, thinking about what you're saying and thinking about the happily ever afters that you were talking about in your chapter 2 at Maslow, and you say, it's interesting how like the movies, the Disney movies, that's how they end. I was trying to think about, okay, well, how should they begin? Should they begin with the couple just getting married and then they go through the trials and tribulations and all that other things? And what's the end of that movie? I'm not quite sure. My whole point is, I mean, I know it's kind of like, where's he going with this? I actually think what's really interesting, and I can't remember exactly where I read these statistics, but in some instances, they're seeing that there's some divorce numbers are starting to come down as people are getting married older. And I think one of the benefits of people getting married older is exactly what you're saying, Amber. You know yourself better, right? Your brain isn't really even fully developed until men probably never, but maybe as they get a little bit older into their higher 20s to their 30s, where they know themselves, where they know their needs, where they know their wants, where they know all those things. That's like definitely one of the benefits, I think, of getting married older. I mean, one of the downsides is, we're pushing out child rearing years, the best child rearing years, and there's health implications of that, and fertility numbers are starting to drop. So it's like nothing is perfect in this world, right? We get married later. Maybe we have healthier marriages. Maybe we have all of our needs and wants. But, how does that work out with child rearing and everything? I mean, the statistics and science will play that out much more intelligently than I can. But I guess what I'm saying is everything that you're saying is why I'm a big advocate for people to wait on getting married until they really know themselves and know their wants. I don't know if I'm extrapolating that you're an advocate of that as well, but I'm curious because I know it sounds like you had some issues with your husband. You guys separated, and you figured out what you needed to get back to a marriage that works for you. I mean, obviously you have three kids, and that's great. But I'm not saying that getting married later is the solution for everything. But I'm just curious, do you think that's something that you would advocate for? I'm wondering what your thoughts are.
For sure. I mean, just personally, like I don't think I would go out and like publicly become the face of that message by any means, but I know that for my own children, that will be the advice that I give them as they get older. I saw a thing on Instagram the other day that said, "Hey, good news. If you've made it past 30 and you're not married yet, at least you've probably gotten you've gotten past your first divorce or something of that nature. And it resonated with me. You know what I mean? So they're saying like, hey, yeah, you're past 30. A lot of people have been married by this time in your life, but hey, at least you're past the age where you probably will have missed that first divorce. I am on my second marriage. My husband is on his second marriage. Both of us got married to our first spouses incredibly young. In both of our cases, those relationships fell apart in a really sad way, in a way that when we look back, probably could have been saved if we had been more mature people than we were. But I went into this marriage with Charlie. Now we have a 15-year age gap. So I'm 39 and he's 54. I think a benefit of our relationship has been not only that we got married later in life, not later in life, but like later than the 20s when a lot of people get married, but also that my husband is so much more experienced and wiser than I am. And he's kind of like pulling me along, like accelerating my growth, I think, like not staying stuck at, sort of the maturity level of a 39-year-old. I mean, the biggest thing about what made our marriage, again, speaking only for myself, what made our marriage fall apart was the two of us not fully knowing ourselves, our own deepest needs yet. And so it was interesting, we also came from a very evangelical past, which we've both deconstructed from now. But one of the things that happened to us was that we came into our marriage with that sort of Christian notion of we are one and I am second. So we were constantly in the beginning trying to put ourselves second for each other. But what we realize is that nobody can do that perfectly, because at the end of the day, all of us have the natural desire and inclination to be inward focused and focused on ourselves. And so when you're going into a relationship saying, I forsake myself so that I can be what this other person needs, I feel like for most people, where that's going to lead is a buildup of resentment, because the only person who can perfectly meet your need is you, because you're the only person who knows them in their fullness. And so by the time my husband and I separated, I was in a place where I felt like things had been very unfair. I had been giving a lot more than I was receiving, because somewhere along the way, I had stayed committed to this, I am second and I put you first, but my husband had lost sight of that. So we separated because of all that resentment that had built up. And in my 6 months apart from him, I spent that time believing that I was going to divorce him. So during that time, I said, I am going to sit down and I'm going to figure out what the hell I need that I can get for myself so that I can live independently and happily, meeting all of my own needs. And if I never meet anyone else again, I will be happy because I know what I need and I know how to get it. And after 6 months and going to a lot of therapy and getting on medication and Charlie doing the same, when we came back together, to have conversations about what are we doing now? Are we divorcing or are we going to try it again? I just said to him, here is what I have to have, and I can get this for myself. Can you do these things? Can you help me get these things for myself? If you can't, I would rather go do it on my own, but I would like to do it with you. If you can help me, give me these things that I need. And he said, yes, I will do that. I will make sure that you have those needs met. And then it was me turning to him and saying, what are your needs? What do you have to have? And he laid that out for me. And we made the agreement that we are both responsible for meeting our own needs first. Because again, we're the only ones who both know what our own needs are. But now that we're both aware of each other's needs, we are also committed to enriching each other's lives, for anticipating moments where we can meet the needs that we know each other have without them having to ask. And also both of us being willing and able to communicate our needs when the other person isn't meeting them, and being willing to meet those needs when we're asked. And that was how we got here.
Thank you. I'm so glad that you said that, because I was thinking again about how it works. How is it that we take care of ourselves and then also keep in mind the other person and compromise? And Amber, best of luck on your book. When is it coming out?
It releases, it's on pre-order now, but it comes out October 29th of
Okay.
2024.
All right. We're going to link all of that stuff in the show notes, in addition to your article on compassionate feminism and your profile in Psychology Today. You make such great content, like I said, on TikTok, and I love your writing, and I'm really excited. And thank you for taking this time to talk with us. I know you've got a lot going on, and so I appreciate it so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh,
Amber.
well, thank you. Yeah, no, it's been a joy.
Good is in the Details is produced by Dr. Gwendolyn Dolske and Rudy Salo. Remember, you can check out our Patreon, patreon.com/goodisinthedetails to get extra content and support the pod. Get a shout out from us. We're also taking sponsors, so send us an email, goodisinthedetailspod@gmail.com. We're taking sponsors for June and July. And we'd also like to thank our sponsor for this episode, Factor Meals. Remember to check out the link in the show notes for your 50% off. And also our sponsor, AvonMoreInc.com. It's that bridge business you've been hearing me talk about, a small business that started in the 90s and ended up to being a global sensation amongst the bridge community. If you have friends who play bridge, your family, or if you play bridge, you got to check out AvonMoreInc.com. They have everything for your next bridge party. Smart playing cards, which are also great for kids, coasters, tallies. You're gonna love it. AvonMoreInc.com, and let them know that Good is in the Details sent you. You can check us out on Instagram, Good is in the Details Pod, and on Facebook. Okay, until next time, bye.